Well, good morning, everybody. It's just before 6 a.m. on Wednesday, June 25th, 2025. I'm Andrew Pritchard. I'm in for Eric Snodgrass today, who is making his way towards some well-deserved time off. And so the thing that makes, Eric, Matt, and myself and our little weather team here kind of unique is that our brains all kind of work in different ways, and we're all very focused on different areas of the weather and how it relates to you all. So Eric and Matt, they've got those big brains that like to look way out into the future there, that kind of medium to long-range forecast guidance that helps you understand where this whole pattern's going, whereas my brain is much more focused on hyperlocal, what is happening now, where do we have weather risks. I do a lot of weather safety work with Nutrien here, so I'm always worried about what do we have today, tomorrow, the next couple of days that's really going to cause some trouble. So instead of trying to kind of wedge myself into being Eric and Matt with you guys this morning, since I've got your attention, we're going to kind of just walk through some of our weather risks that we've got with this pattern here, some of the trouble spots we're dealing with, and where this whole thing is going as we head into next week. Now, I like to start my day, especially this time of year, with the satellite picture. We like to look at, what happened last night after I stopped paying attention. Did we pop up any thunderstorm clusters that are going to have a big impact on the next 24 hours? What are we starting our day with here? What are the subtle little players that could tap into all of the hot, muggy, ripe air for generating thunderstorms that we have in place across the central and eastern U.S. Again, thanks in part to this big spinning area of high pressure. You see the clockwise flow in the atmosphere here, kind of centered over the eastern U.S. So we keep the Gulf open. We've got that transport of moisture northward. And then over the periphery of that ridge, we've got these little jet stream disturbances that kick off, clusters of showers and storms that ride over the ridge here and bring us these timely rains that we've needed across the northern plains into parts of the upper Midwest and at times into the Canadian prairie. We want to understand where this whole thing is going over the next several days. So it's beneath that ridge of high pressure. We continue to have all of the heat and humidity, the worst of it anyway. We've got these heat advisories in place across portions of the mid and lower Mississippi Valley into the Ohio River Valley, the mid-south, and parts of the eastern U.S. there as well, dealing with this. Across the eastern Corn Belt, we've got a few more days to deal with this. We'll see these heat advisories begin to expire. Here in central Illinois, ours expires Thursday evening. It'll be over the next 24 to 40 hours following that we start to kind of, again, bring some relief into this region here and kind of turn the heat and humidity down just a bit more to more typical late June levels, which is still going to be pretty warm and pretty humid. Now, again, around that ridge of high pressure, again, that's where we see the organized shower and thunderstorm activity. This is your last 48 hours. Really been focused here across parts of New Mexico where we've seen some heavy rainfall, and we'll continue to see that over the next 24 to 48 hours. And then these showers and storms, they continue to ride up through Kansas and Colorado into Nebraska, right along the I-80 corridor here across Iowa into northern Illinois, parts of central and southern Wisconsin. And as I just kind of roll this forward, such that we're looking at the last 10 days, a lot of badly needed precipitation on here. And my eyes are drawn up to the Canadian prairie. I communicate with the folks up here, and we were watching this big weekend storm here that we hoped would bring heavy moisture to parts of Alberta and Saskatchewan. And it did. We brought anywhere from 3 to 4 inches of new rain into parts of the Highway 16 corridor here, a little bit lighter across southern portions of Saskatchewan and southeastern Alberta, which we kind of worried about there. But still, this is kind of the first in several chances for some organized rainfall across the prairies, an area that badly needs that. And you can see pockets of heavy rainfall from thunderstorm complexes across the rest of the Dakotas down to Nebraska, over towards Iowa, who's really been kind of left out through the late spring into the first part of the summer here. So good to get some rain moving in across parts of Iowa. It's really the eastern Corn Belt here that's been, again, kind of sitting under this ridge, dealing with much more in the way of isolated hit or miss shower and thunderstorm activity over the last couple of days. So I know we still had some moisture deep down in the soil there. Just out the door here at our Champaign farm, we were looking about a week ago, and still some good moisture down there, about an inch below the soil, but we really are starting to zap that here with these hot, sunny, and at times breezy days across the eastern Corn Belt here. So we really want to kind of understand when we can get some more in the way of, thunderstorm complexes rolling over the ridge into this region, and I think it's going to be, several days, but I think we get there in the first week of July or so, and we'll look at that as we get a little bit later there. But quick look at where we've seen rain and then where we've got rain going right now. We'll look at the radar loop as we went through the overnight and then into the very early morning hours, just kind of rocking this back and forth. And you can see it right there, the boundary just kind of running from New Mexico up through Nebraska and Iowa. And this is where thunderstorms will continue to focus themselves over the next 48 hours until we start to kind of evolve this pattern a bit over the weekend into early next week. And we kind of just do a little subtle realignment with the jet stream there, and we'll talk about what the difference is there with that realignment. Now, in the near term, we do have several risks for severe weather associated with little disturbances running over the top of that ridge. Again, we've got a risk here as we go through the day today. It's really going to be focused across parts of eastern Nebraska into western and northern Iowa. I do think I might extend this just a little bit here over toward the Wisconsin and Iowa border. I wouldn't be surprised to see a couple of rotating storms right in this area of northeast Iowa and southern Minnesota, and I'll talk about why that is here in just a moment. But kind of just, again, if we look at the categorical risk, slight risk there. You can see the marginal risk that runs from Colorado all the way over here to Ohio. So kind of just following that ridge, and then some organized severe storms possible across the southeastern U.S. today as well. We've got a slight risk in place across the panhandle of Florida, all the way up through the Carolinas. That tornado risk is going to be highest here from Nebraska into Iowa. We've got a little disturbance running along that boundary that could get just enough wind shear to get some storms rotating across that area. In general, though, we're just talking about, gusty winds and some hail and some of these, summertime thunderstorms that can sometimes get a little bit unruly here and produce some severe weather as they ride up over the top of that ridge. We'll look at the risk tomorrow, very similar. Again, a marginal risk. It could be that as we get closer to tomorrow, we could see a slight risk introduced here as we get some higher confidence, but this is a very summertime pattern. Again, a marginal risk across the southeast up toward the mid-Atlantic, a marginal risk here from Kansas up to the Great Lakes, and then we've got a marginal risk here across Montana where another system is coming in with a frontal boundary, such that as we get to Saturday, we'll have a slight risk here across the Dakotas. Here's the next system coming in over the ridge. Marginal risk still in place across the southeast up toward the mid-Atlantic. So the pattern just kind of continues to roll over itself until we get to kind of early next week. And so now let's look at the jet stream, and we'll talk about what I mean here. And so this is what we have today. We've got our big ridge that Eric and Matt have been talking about a lot over the last week or so, and that continues to spin here with little disturbances coming in here, kind of coming up from New Mexico, riding over that ridge here through Nebraska up to the Great Lakes, essentially. And we just repeat that over the next 3 days or so before we get some change. So this is running through the day today. You're looking at your 500 millibar jet stream winds. This is as we get into Thursday. This is as we get into Friday. And now the pattern's starting to kind of break a little bit here. We've got a disturbance coming in. This is the one that, again, has that risk for severe weather in Montana on Friday, and then the Dakotas on Saturday. You see this patch of faster jet stream winds. Well, this one comes in here, and it kind of dives in here and breaks up the ridge a little bit here. We get into Sunday night. This is getting into Monday, and now instead of this big dominant ridge sitting over the eastern U.S., we've got this trough diving in across the Great Lakes, and that's going to allow the eventual development of a ridge of high pressure here that kind of sneaks back in toward the Pacific Northwest, parts of the Canadian Prairie, as we get into kind of the beginning of July, with disturbances rolling over the top of it here, kind of coming in from, again, Montana, the Dakotas, and then diving in across Iowa and Illinois. And this would be maybe a more favorable setup for the Eastern Corn Belt to get into some of these ridge-riding thunderstorm complexes. If I could kind of just jump back and forth, and when I do this, I'm going to go up here to our 500 millibar height anomalies and do it in a 5-day sliding window, although we're starting to kind of lose it. So let's go ahead and run it back here to the beginning here, where we get the really clear picture of that ridge. Again, Wednesday, Thursday this week, June 25th and the 26th. See the big ridge over the eastern U.S. here, flow coming from New Mexico over that, top of the ridge through Nebraska and Iowa into the Great Lakes. This is where we have that thunderstorm activity focused today. Well, as we kind of roll it into the weekend and then early next week, here comes that Dakotas, Northern Plains, Great Lakes wave that kind of rolls us into a Great Lakes trough as we get into the first few days of July. So now we've got a ridge west with a trough east, a better alignment here for northwest flow and thunderstorm clusters coming out of the Dakotas into potentially the mid-Mississippi Valley and the Eastern Corn Belt. So this would be a more favorable pattern. I think, right now we're kind of locked into this Nebraska, Iowa, Wisconsin frontal boundary that's oriented southwest to northeast. This would reverse that boundary such that it runs from the Dakotas into Illinois and Indiana, and we would get thunderstorm clusters that develop here over the high plains and then roll through the Corn Belt and, again, across parts of Iowa, Illinois, and Indiana. So the reason I kind of show this subtle difference here, it's still one way of looking at a hot, stormy pattern, but as we reverse the storm track, I think we open the door for more in the way of significant rains and maybe a severe thunderstorm complex or two across, the I-states here, Iowa, Illinois, and Indiana, as we get into the first week, maybe 10 days of July. So right now, these areas focused on hot, humid days with pop-up isolated shower and thunderstorm activity. We're starting to dry the soil, and we want to know, are we going to kind of run into a pattern that's going to have more of this hot, dry weather across the area, or are we going to get back into a pattern that has, one or two opportunities to get some heavier rainfall associated with the bigger thunderstorm complex? And this would kind of be that pattern as we run into the first half of July. So this first wave, it kind of kicks itself out of here, and then you've got another disturbance coming in from the Pacific Northwest, kind of runs into the prairies, brings us some rain up here around the 5th and 6th of July before we kind of get it running over the top of that ridge, potentially as we get into the 8th and 9th, 10th of July. And this kind of just, again, it's not an extremely stormy look right now, but I think it kind of may get us there, although there's some kind of low confidence built into that forecast. What I want to do now is kind of actually zoom in on the severe weather risk over the next couple of days here and talk about why I think we do have that risk for maybe a couple of rotating storms along the boundary here that continues to park itself right along the I-80 corridor. So this is the HRRR model. We're looking at the forecast simulated radar here. So this is running us through the morning hours here today, Wednesday, June 25th. So this would be what it kind of looks like right around noon. So we've got that area of showers and storms lifting up toward the Iowa-Minnesota border into southern portions of Wisconsin. Now, what's going on here? You've got clearing skies. We've got that ridge of high pressure. It is hot and it's muggy. So we take the rain, we lift it north of the area. We quickly do what's called modifying this environment. And when we sometimes modify a rain-cooled environment, there's a lot of vorticity within that. And so we can generate an area of low pressure here kind of in the wake there. And that's exactly what the models are trying to do as we get into the mid and late afternoon hours. So this would be about 3 to 4 p.m. And what you're seeing now is the potential for maybe some supercell thunderstorms to develop across northern, maybe, down to north central portions of Iowa. So this could potentially be a couple of storms that are rotating, prompting some tornado warnings and maybe producing a tornado or two as this little, I call them a swirl, to be kind of candid there, but these little subtle area of low pressure, subtle little swirls that run along that boundary full of hot, humid air that wants to rise, it wants to produce thunderstorms. Well, if we give it just a little bit of shear, it can get those storms organized, and it can, in some cases, get them rotating. The HRRR kind of going after a couple of rotating storms here in northeastern Nebraska late this afternoon and evening as well. If I jump over and show you the 3-kilometer NAM, we look for some agreement here. Do we see the same evolution? Well, running through the morning hours, we see that area of showers and storms lifting from Interstate 80 up toward the Iowa-Minnesota border. We get this area to modify and recover. It becomes very hot and muggy. This would be about 5 p.m., 6 p.m., 7 p.m. You're seeing the exact same thing here, kind of right across northern Iowa into southern Minnesota. Some slight disagreement in the exact placement, but my eyes are kind of just drawn right to this little swirl that runs along the boundary. And you can see it here if we look at the theta E. This is a fancy way to look at how hot and muggy is it? How much thunderstorm fuel do we have in the environment? And watch the evolution. So here's as the sun comes up, right about 10, 11, 12 p.m. now. Showers and storms lifting north. You see the cooler air on the north side here, but you see the bright pinks starting to show up quickly and surge north across the state of Iowa. So here's this zone right here where the air wants to spin, and it's suddenly very hot and muggy. Shower and thunderstorm activity exits the area during the morning. It becomes extremely hot and muggy. And so any thunderstorms in this area, would have the potential to rotate as they move through. So you see the impacts of the thunderstorms developing here during the late afternoon and evening. They kind of eat some holes into the instability. But this would be where I would look for organized severe weather today, kind of from northeast Nebraska through northern portions of Iowa, and then maybe southern portions of Wisconsin, the chance for a couple of rotating storms. Maybe watch out for a tornado or two. If I jump back over here to the simulated radar, look at Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio. Look at the different nature here to the thunderstorm activity. Instead of these cells that kind of live for a long time and race across the area, you get these pop-up shower and thunderstorm cells that kind of, they go up. Here kind of along Interstate 74, north of that from Illinois into the Indianapolis area, parts of central and southern Ohio, you get these thunderstorms that just kind of pop up and then they gust themselves out. You see the same thing here on the HRRR. It's a little bit more isolated in nature, just these little pop-up thunderstorms. So this is the difference here, in your thunderstorm zones with this big ridge of high pressure. Over the top of the ridge where you've got jet stream flow, Interacting with that boundary, organized heavy rain producing thunderstorms beneath the ridge where you're just kind of stuck in that hot, steamy air mass. You get these very isolated, localized heavy downpours. And that is the story as we run through today. That is the story as we run through the day tomorrow. You see the boundary is in almost the same place. It moves east maybe 100 miles, but the same story as we head through Thursday afternoon. Isolated pop-up storms across the eastern Corn Belt, the Ohio Valley. Organized storms, maybe some severe weather across parts of Iowa, Minnesota, and Wisconsin. So with the front here oriented southwest to northeast, this is where your heavy thunderstorm activity would be located. And then, if we get that pattern shift in the first week of July, where the front now is oriented from the Dakotas into Illinois and Indiana, this would be your zone that you would have these thunderstorm clusters instead moving from northwest to southeast. So this is that transition that Eric and Matt will be walking you through over the next 10 to 14 days. As we get toward the first week of July, is this area here, kind of from Des Moines to Indianapolis, getting in on some of those heavy rain producing thunderstorm clusters. Now, as I just kind of jump over to the NAM model, the lower res model, you can follow this frontal boundary across Illinois and Indiana as we get into Friday night. It's kind of oriented right here, but as it rolls over here and we lose the support from the jet stream and this front kind of just crashes down into this hot, steamy air mass. We'll talk about maybe some scattered storms here, but not a lot in the way of heavy rain associated with this one across Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio. We're not going to get kind of the same treatment that we've seen up here as we kind of just break this pattern and roll over into something new. So let's look at the European model, the precipitation forecast here, and then we'll talk about just kind of the bigger picture as a whole as we wrap this video up. But I just want to time out some of the bigger players here that I just kind of mentioned in a couple of different ways. So over the next couple of days, heavy rain continues to be focused here from New Mexico up through Colorado, Nebraska and Iowa at times, the Dakotas and southern Minnesota into Wisconsin. And then we've got these showers and storms across the southeast as well, much more isolated hit or miss in between. So here's your Wednesday afternoon, your Wednesday evening. We've got that shower and storm activity, the risk for severe weather from Nebraska into Iowa and Minnesota. We'll roll this into Thursday afternoon and evening. Very similar look here. Showers and storms most numerous from eastern Kansas up to the Great Lakes. That risk of severe weather we talked about right along that frontal boundary. On Friday, the front sags into parts of Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio, starting to kind of wash out though. So we do get some showers and storms kind of running from St. Louis through Indianapolis over towards, Columbus. Not going to be a heavy rain event though here, kind of hit or miss, couple severe storms, some locally heavy rainfall. This would be your Saturday. This is when we get that disturbance coming out of Montana into the northern plains. You get some shower and storm activity, probably some severe weather in the Sioux Falls area down toward, Interstate 80 in Nebraska. We may get a MCS to generate here, maybe a bow echo or a forward propagating thunderstorm cluster kind of racing from the Dakotas into the upper Midwest. As we get into Sunday, though, that same front starts to move into Iowa, Minnesota, and Wisconsin, maybe northern portions of Illinois. The models are kind of going after a southward propagating area of thunderstorm activity with this one as we go through Sunday and Monday. This is now June 30th. This next wave that rolled out of Montana into the Dakotas, into the Great Lakes, is now pushing into the eastern Corn Belt here. And this is what kind of rolls us into this different pattern now with ridge west, trough east, northwest flow oriented across the Corn Belt. This is not going to kind of, I wouldn't say it's going to get off with a bang. We've got low confidence in the actual players here, but it's more in the way of every 3 to 4 days we get a system that rolls over this ridge. So I just talked about the Saturday, Sunday, Monday chance of storms that rolls from the Dakotas into the eastern Corn Belt. We get a bit of a break here as the pattern resets. It's going to be an air mass change here. It's not going to be so hot and muggy on the tail end of this front. I'll show you that here with our temperature, and maybe we'll look at the instability forecast here in a moment to kind of time this out as well. But we kind of get into the later part of next week, right around the 4th of July, and we get that next disturbance that rolls over the ridge. Another thunderstorm complex here in the Dakotas, potentially running down into the eastern Corn Belt right around, again, July 4th and 5th. We'll roll this out through the 6th, 7th, and 8th. You see another one here, another little cluster of storms developing in the Dakotas and then running southeast into the eastern Corn Belt. You can take it all the way out here to around July 9th and 10th. You see the same thing, another cluster of storms associated with a disturbance that, if I jump over here, show you your jet stream winds, just kind of running up over that ridge and then trying to dive down here into the eastern Corn Belt. So Let's run back over to AgWX, some of these maps that you're familiar with, and I'm going to run back just to the homepage. And if you're not familiar with it, head on over to ag-wx.com, and you can look at all of this on your own. So this is everything I just showed you. Current hazards, we've got that heat advisories, we've got the flood watches here where showers and storms are running over the top of that ridge. It is hot, it's steamy beneath the ridge. We'll talk about what we've got here over the next 7 days. Which again is repeated rains here across Nebraska, Iowa, Minnesota, and Wisconsin, where we're talking about 2 to 4 inches of rain over the next 7 days. You see the heavy rainfall here forecast across the southeastern U.S. up toward the mid-Atlantic, where we're talking about anywhere from 1 to 2 inches of rain. And then between that, Missouri, eastern Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, Kentucky, Tennessee, we're talking about these pop-up isolated showers and storms. So you see kind of a uniform brushing here of that light blue shaded colors that's talking about maybe a few tenths of an inch, but there are absolutely a lot of people here who will be, completely missed by shower and storm activity over the next 4 to 5 days and have to kind of wait till next week when we get more in the way of organized showers and storms rolling over the top of that ridge. You got your severe weather risk today, tomorrow, and Saturday, and then below that, your risk for excessive rainfall. Again, over the top of the ridge today, this would be tomorrow, and then we get a bit of a pattern reset. Here's your next system that kind of dives in across the eastern Corn Belt. I don't want to say blows the pattern up, but gives us a bit of a different look. We'll look one more time here at the precipitation forecast side by side, and I'll show you where we start to lose some of that confidence. So this is going to run us through the next couple of days. This is your Wednesday evening look. Again, showers and storms heaviest from Nebraska to Minnesota and Wisconsin. Very good agreement with that. Pop-up showers and storms across Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio during that time. We'll take it into your Thursday. This is Friday. You're going to see both models going after this front that comes in from the Dakotas into Minnesota and Wisconsin on Saturday. This is now Saturday afternoon, Saturday evening. This would be your Sunday forecast now. Model's been going after, again, I mentioned this southward propagating MCS that could bring some rain, some severe weather to parts of Iowa, Wisconsin, Illinois, back along I-80 as we go through Sunday night into Monday morning. And then this is when the pattern kind of begins to shift. We bring in a pattern change that will kind of bring back the heat and the humidity across the Corn Belt proper, and then allow for a bit of that pattern reset. So quieter to get started next week, kind of Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, a bit quieter across the Corn Belt as we kind of have a break in the pattern and get us into one that every 3 to 4 days, you can see both models have this disturbance here as we get into July 3rd and 4th, developing here across the northern plains and beginning to roll down over the top of our western U.S. ridge, bringing maybe some more organized rain back into the Corn Belt in the form of northwest to southeast propagating thunderstorm clusters. And again, this is pretty good agreement as we get out there kind of 10 days into the pattern, 10 to 14 days. So this is kind of that evolution that I expect over the next couple of weeks. Again, kind of rolling us from an eastern U.S. ridge. Again, we'll just kind of jump back and look at something where I can kind of, show you this evolution. We'll look at the jet stream winds one more time with that height pattern, rolling it back to present day. Got that ridge over the east. And then as we get into kind of early to mid next week, that ridge shifts off to the northwest. Here kind of centered over the Canadian Prairie, over the northwestern U.S. with that trough over the Great Lakes. So again, this accomplishes a couple things. Corn Belt gets a pattern change. We get a break from that humidity, but we kind of reset to a pattern where the heat and the humidity is kind of locked off to our southwest. Thunderstorm clusters then roll over the top of that. Again, just following the height lines. Follow the lines from the Dakotas down into the eastern Corn Belt. This would be your storm track here with a pattern like this. So this is what Eric and Matt will be talking about as they come back with you Thursday and Friday. Appreciate a little bit of your time here. I know that we think a little bit different here, and I hope it was kind of nice to talk about some of the precipitation chances, the severe weather here across the northern plains, or I should say really the western and central Corn Belt, with an eventual rollover here to something that I think is going to bring more in the way of timely rains to this corridor from the Dakotas into southern portions of the Ohio Valley. So just to finish it up, we'll look at some of the differences here in the long-range forecast. Again, over the next 7 days, really good agreement. The heaviest rain focused from eastern Nebraska through Iowa, Minnesota, and Wisconsin, right where that frontal boundary is, again, just kind of stalled out right along from Interstate 80 up toward the I-90 corridor. But this is where we're talking about 2 to 4 inches of rainfall over the next 7 days. But then as I kind of try to pull up the week 2 forecast, Now let's look at straight at some of our models. I got to scroll up here. This is, week 2, July 2nd through the 8th. And you look across the board here, you see the CPC, NOAA going after, broad, slightly above normal precipitation, chances across the entirety of the Corn Belt with heavier rain here across the monsoon activity over the southwestern United States with drier conditions across the Northeast and, near normal across California and the Central Valley. But look over here. This is the European ensemble. This is the European AI, and this is the GFS ensemble. And I see a couple of things here where the models are struggling to figure out what's going to be the bigger signal. And I see 3 things going on. 1, the monsoon. 2, thunderstorm clusters riding over the top of our shifting ridge. And then 3, thunderstorm activity over the southeastern United States, kind of associated with some of these cutoff lows that Matt talked about yesterday. So what I see here is the European ensemble kind of saying everything gets it done. You got rain that makes its way from the monsoon here. We've got thunderstorm clusters that are going to be riding over the top of that ridge, bringing in above normal precipitation chances to much of the Corn Belt, with those cutoff lows producing a lot of rain here across the south and southeastern United States as well. I then see, I apologize, this is jumping around a bit here, the European AI forecast system kind of saying not so worried about the cutoff lows over the Gulf. It's going to be the monsoon here, and then those thunderstorm clusters kind of riding over the ridge. This is that corridor I showed you from the Dakotas into Illinois here that I think could get set up for, a couple of more intense thunderstorm clusters or MCSs or bow echoes that could run from the Dakotas into the eastern Corn Belt. I know we're brown here, but this kind of is we're using these to give us clues here to the pattern, and this is one that kind of goes after those thunderstorm clusters over the top of that ridge and not so concerned about the cutoff lows over the Gulf. Whereas then if I jump up here to the GFS, a little more concerned about the cutoff lows and some heavy rainfall here across the southern and southeastern U.S. kind of mutes the thunderstorm cluster, potential across the Dakotas into the eastern Corn Belt. You still very much see it there, but maybe robbing some of that moisture. So side by side, once again, all 4 of these maps, again, NOAA says pretty good chance we're going to have thunderstorm activity continuing here July 2nd through the 8th. And then just some slightly different variations on that pattern from the European ensemble AI forecast system and the GFS ensemble as well. So Matt will be back with you tomorrow. He'll kind of break things down in a little bit more detail, but just know that right now, over the next couple of days, we've got this dangerous heat locked in. It's going to be a couple of days before this pattern starts to break. I'm starting to get asked that here in Illinois and Indiana. When does the pattern break? It's going to be pretty miserable through Friday. It breaks a bit Saturday, Sunday. We get much more comfortable summertime air in the majority of the Corn Belt as we get to Monday and Tuesday of next week. We've got that severe weather risk. Again, Nebraska through Iowa. Wouldn't be surprised to see this slight risk extended into parts of Wisconsin and Illinois by the end of the day today. That marginal risk for a couple of pop-up severe storms across Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio. Slight risk for more organized severe weather across the southeast U.S. as well. Again, that ridge continues to evolve as we head through Friday. And then Saturday, here comes that system that kind of breaks the pattern up. Slight risk across the Dakotas. We'll roll that on into probably this area on Sunday, probably looking at a slight risk across Wisconsin, Iowa, Illinois, maybe northern Missouri, before the system slinks off to the south even further as we get into Monday. And then we kind of reset the pattern. I have a hard time stopping talking. I'm going to wrap it up here. I know it was a little bit different today. I appreciate you giving me a few minutes of your time. We are kind of stuck in this pattern another few days before we start to roll over into something a little bit different next week. Eric and Matt talk a lot about what's coming, and they're going to do it for you here Thursday and Friday. Hope you have a great rest of your Wednesday.